Hi everybody. So I'm going to read my paper again because there was a problem with the internet connection, and I'm just going to go over the points that I mentioned prior to the internet failure, so that there's just recapitulation of the ideas that were shared. Okay, so Hugh MacDiarmid's poetry brings together Marxism and radical nationalism and makes nature into the site for thinking through the interlinked processes of capitalist production and development of human thought. Scott Lyell writes that MacDiarmid's socialism arises from a creative impetus to form a specific Scottish community. He further opines that MacDiarmid's desire to recover a Scottish voice is intrinsically connected to um, the opposition towards United Kingdom's facilitation of international capitalism. MacDiarmid himself believed in a form of evolutionary Marxism which would free the Scottish people from the grasp of a culture of global capitalism, heralding changes in the ways in which Scottish Gaelic is popularized and also reintroduced into cultural texts written in English. For MacDiarmid, Scotland's parochialism stems from the country's dependence on England's metropolitanism, and it could be counteracted upon by a conscious and motivated use of the vernacular. It is therefore intriguing that a text such as A Drunk Man Looks at the Thistle should develop the vernacular in a bid to acquaint the reader with the Scottish landscape. It is here that Marxist dialectical theory, as developed by Oswald Spengler, becomes important for MacDiarmid because it makes it possible to envisage an advancement into the future without negating the present conditions of a parochial culture. In a letter to H. J. C. Grierson, MacDiarmid explains the dialectical flux between the Apollonian or classical world order, which he takes to be English, and Faustian or modern world order, which he considers to be Scottish. He writes that it is through this flux that submerged and neglected elements, example braid Scots, come into their own at the expense of more dominating elements which have completely fulfilled themselves and are bankrupt of any reserve of impredictable evolution. Following MacDiarmid, Solly MacLean's poetry, specifically Ankylethion, also relies on Marxist thinking to make the southeastern part of Skye into the locale from which cultural and political changes are made possible in Scotland. In my paper, I explored the particular significance of the writings of Friedrich Engels on the dialectics of nature and Walter Benjamin's on history and the coming of a Marxist revolution for thinking through Hugh MacDiarmid's and Solly MacLean's representations of nature in their poetry. Engels' application of Marxist dialectics to a study of nature makes it possible for MacDiarmid to conceive of ecological changes as based on the alienated nature of capitalist relations in society. In the Dialectics of Nature, Engels writes, "The whole of organic nature is one continuous proof of the identity or inseparability of form and content. Morphological and physiological phenomena, form and function, mutually determine one another. The differentiation of form, the cell, determines differentiation of substance into muscle, skin, bone, epithelium, etc., and the differentiation of substances in turn determines difference of form." This theory has been found to hold true within later studies of biology, where studies of increasing population of the density of microbes have been found to reveal changes in genetic expression leading to new forms of genetic orderings. Applying the same principle to society, MacDiarmid writes that the movement that brings about its own antithesis will be responsible for encouraging spiritual development and social change in Scotland. In a poem addressed to younger Scottish writers and collected in his autobiography Lucky Poet, MacDiarmid writes that the movement away from the poetry of purgative action to the poetry of pure feeling strives to locate the meaning of experience in the phenomena of experience. This emphasis on the material circumstances that engender Scottish poetry can only be justified so long as it brings about changes in the patterns of thinking. And he writes, "Scottish writers, the height and depth of your writings will be measured by the extent to which the dialectics of our era find expression in the artistic imagery, how wildly, forcefully, clearly the burning contemporary problems are expressed in it, the class war, the struggles and ideals of the proletariat bent on changing the world and consequently on changing human nature. Changing human nature depends on rationally regulating the interactions between humanity and nature, which includes transforming the modes of production and distribution. McDermott therefore makes the claim that poetry written about nature must invariably relate to ideas of social revolution if it is to have value. Aspects of such thinking are present in his early works, such as A Drunk Man Looks at the Thistle, where the spirit of the drunk man unites with the spirit of Dostoevsky in order to initiate a social revolution in Scotland in the footsteps of Russia. Of particular significance is the way in which the poem uses the meditation on the flower to offer a treatise on the nature of space and time. McDermott writes, "What's an atom on a twig that takes a billion to an inch to the root of shoots that make the bygrowth of the earth about the mighty trunk of space that spreads ramel of light that have no end, the trunk with centuries for rings, comets for fruit, November shooters for leaves, that in its autumn far and man at mainst or sick a twig, and all the countless atoms is." The use of nature imagery to describe the vastness of the universe is significant because it aligns the prospect of revolution, which occurs in messianic time, looking out for the arrival of the Christ hero, with the Anthropocene. Walter Benjamin's On the Concept of History provides an astute critique of history as this linear progression through a homogeneous and empty time. He writes, "History is the object of a construction whose place is formed not in homogeneous and empty time but in that which is fulfilled by the here and now." Insofar as Dostoevsky provides the moral and philosophical parameters for effecting social change, taking into consideration the symbolic role of Christ, the dialectical change that spurs the revolution can only be brought about by the material conditions of the present. Elucidating further on the present moment of history, Benjamin writes, "In relation to the history of organic life on Earth, the miserable 50 millennia of Homo sapiens represents something like the last 2 seconds of a 24-hour day. The entire history of civilized humanity would on this scale take up only one-fifth of the last second of the last hour." Benjamin's writing brings to the forefront what is seldom acknowledged in studies of revolution that strives to assert human freedom. Efforts to establish freedom of action are inseparable from the evolutionary and planetary history of life on Earth that operates on a completely different time scale. This inseparability of human action from its effects on the landscape then links the freedom of the proletariat to the mutative changes in the landscape. The poem's language in preserving the Scottish dialect helps to record and express perceptions that are specific to the organic world of Scotland and its people and is unfamiliar to the modern mind of the English, characterized by the classical spirit. Catherine Kerrigan, in Where Extremes Meet, describes this aspect of MacDiarmid's poetic practice and states that Scots, which was predominantly a rural language for MacDiarmid, retained a brash and resilient sense of the fullness of the physical world. Using Scots to instantiate a transaction between language and the natural world while envisaging a social revolution helps to embody the process of the dialectic. The language becomes part of the social change it wants to effect in the world. MacDiarmid writes further in Hymns to Lenin and characterizes his poetry as one that makes the organic thing more organic and finds its universal material in the people. In the later poems leading to the Gera series, instantiating the process of the dialectic within language goes beyond a close detailing of the landscape and the process of daily life towards contrasting the achievements of European writing with the writings of the Orient. A study of the different linguistic forms of the East counteracts the notion of history as progressing through homogeneous and empty time. In a poem addressed to the late 18th century poet Duncan Ban MacIntyre, who was a forester and a deer stalker, MacDiarmid catalogues examples of learned poetry from China to India to oppose the perceived sense of inferiority that afflicts Scottish literature when placed against English writings. He writes, A Hindu poet may proceed to any length he pleases within the limits of 1,000 syllables to the half line, the Dandaka meter, of which a specimen occurs in the drama called Malati Madhava, Act 5, offers more than any other and almost incredible capacity of expression. For McDermott, formal elements of language are specific to particular kinds of national experiences. Bringing in an example from Sanskrit forms of linguistic expression overcomes the cultural subordination of Scots established in relation to the English language, and it also makes it possible to appreciate with renewed understanding the material circumstances that condition the writing of Scottish literature. Describing the critique that Ban McIntyre encountered for his poetry, which was written from the perspective of someone who, as McDermott states, is unlettered but wise in speech and practiced. McDermott notes, "You who were writing superb descriptions of wild scenery for its own sake, when the English were still complaining of the frightful irregularity of Highland mountains, most of all disagreeable when the heather is in bloom." For McDermott, then, poetry written about the Scottish landscape was driven by an understanding of a community which opposes the valuation of poetic writing based on the sensibility of the English, which according to McDermott was determined by property, profits, and death. Reference to a wide range of Indian poetry in the poem, from the writings of Tulsidas, Kabir, Rahim, Krishnadas Kaviraj, and Chaitanya, broadens the argument over literary value, and at the same time provides an account of a stimulating literary tradition that had survived the cultural paralytic induced by the empire. The antithesis to arise from the cultural subjection of Scots to the English contrasts the ruler and the ruled, the bourgeois and the proletariat, the rich and the poor. Poetry that celebrates the works of a Scottish naturalist thrives on providing examples of literary achievements from another colonized country in order to underline how existing uses of language can sustain themselves under changing systems of capitalist production and use. Okay. While publishing the Jera poems, McDermott prefaces it with the following statement: "I turn from the poetry of beauty to the poetry of wisdom, that is to say, the poetry of moral and intellectual problems and the emotions that they generate." This particular coming together of sensibility and intellect points towards a dissociation from the use of the Scots dialect and emphasizes a greater synthesis with the English language. The movement away from Scots, however, does not indicate a reluctance to engage with the natural landscape and the rural life that is sustained by it. Jera 3 presents a consideration of Scotland's energy needs and places the individual against the scale of geological time. Human nature is characterized as the private profit motive, and the lines that follow detail the destruction of the environment wrought by capitalism. He writes, "Even as we know, our fossil chemical accumulations of energy in coal, peat, oil, lignite, and the rest are but ephemeral, a transitory blaze, even on the small time scale of civilized man." Of particular interest is the way in which the poem catalogues the multiple meanings of Gaelic words related to the landscape and turns that into a metaphorical harvesting of the fertility of the land. He writes, "I covet the mystery of our Gaelic speech, in which Rugra was at once a blush, a promontory, a headland, a cape, leaden, musical notes, litany, hair of the head, and fawn, land, earth, delight, and a tune in music." Elsewhere in Jera 2, McDermott is concerned about the ways in which the land is resourced for agriculture. Writing about how he represents nature, he states that the poem interprets nature in terms of human activities, being alert to the historical processes and careful to avoid the heresy of separateness, which in such an agricultural setting, for example, so often segregates food supplies from natural, social, and spiritual conditions, when it is the harmony of these that would provide constant adequacy. Perceiving nature as one that is both used and that which conditions selfhood makes it possible to determine the economic causes that give rise to spiritual development. And he writes in Jera 3, the cream of the earth, the famous Dunbar red lands, these red loams combine a maximum of fertility with friable, easy working qualities of unequaled perfection, and with me, men like Henderson of Churnside, admirable people, so fashioned that their native dialect provides an inexhaustible mine of affectionate interest and the study of its people, its customs, antiquities, scenery. Solly MacLean's Ancalethion is a long political poem written between spring and the end of 1939, which takes the mountain range on the Isle of Skye as the basis for a meditation on socialist beliefs that were being attacked by competing ideologies of the time. Like MacDiarmid, MacLean is concerned with the ways in which modern forms of Scottish poetry can offer new ways of representing the natural world. However, unlike his predecessor, MacLean's poetry is more politically charged and ponders over whether the dialectics of a social revolution can truly be unraveled through a study of nature that is specific to Scotland. The poem, divided into seven parts, therefore takes the reader across different temporalities and geographies to present a contest between opposing forces of fascist control and socialist strivings. Christopher White writes that the forces demand eventual and definitive resolution, and which underline the unstable nature of the poem's progress, despite the fact that it takes the apparent fixity of a mountain range as its central focus. The poem appears to entertain the idea that the establishment of a Bolshevik regime in Scotland is the only solution for the problem of equitable land distribution within Scotland. However, as the poem progresses, the reader is rapidly acquainted with the difficulty of making the local into the converging point of the universal. Unlike MacDiarmid, who details the types of soils and their utilization for agriculture in Jera 2, and Kilithion transports the reader to an imaginary realm where the mountain range serving as the basis for such transcendent but the mountain range serves for the basis of such transcendent ruminations. In part 5 of the poem, which introduces the rock formation Nice Point in the west of Skye, as a stallion symbolic of the virility of the landscape that has been castrated by the rising waters of the morass, MacDiarmid writes, long, but come it will, the gold sun will come to us, the Keelan will rise of affable in his white glory, hard the extremity of China, of India, and Scotland, bitter the loss of Spain, field of the great dead, hard the case of Italy, of Germany, and of France, and the folly of England that puts the poor to extremity. In these lines, nature isn't so much presented as affected and shaped by capitalist relations of production as much as it is made out to be the fictional foundation that prefigures thoughts on social change. Rather than characterizing the historical conditions that are necessary for revolutionary struggle, the poem makes the mountain range into a wave like movement through time, replacing the inevitability of a classless society established in messianic time with a series of hypotheses about the processual nature of a Marxist revolution. Walter Benjamin, in On the Concept of History, writes, Marx says that revolutions are the locomotive of a world history, but perhaps it is quite otherwise. Perhaps revolutions are an attempt by passengers on this train, namely the human race, to activate the emergency brake. Benjamin's writing is therefore critical of the notion of a revolution that centers around the coming of a Christ like individual who will redeem the present conditions and propel history towards its own conclusion by abolishing social classes. MacDiarmid, however, accommodates the concept of such a historical progression and reads it into an evolutionary journey of plant life eastwards. He writes, the riddle of evolution remains a challenge, but from the ancient flora of the Western Isles, we learn that in this immense interval of time, there has been little difference in the nature of trees, shrubs, and ferns. For the most part, a Western home has been exchanged for a home in the Far East. If our forests have been wanderers resting in a temporary home until, as conditions changed, they moved on in stages until they reached their present refuge in Asia, that is perhaps a pointer to us that intellectually and spiritually we ought to follow their example. MacDiarmid's statement reveals a sudden hopefulness in the project of reading Scotland's history as part of a larger continuum. For MacLean, on the other hand, the evolutionary principle of nature does not point towards an integration of the self with the surrounding environment or that of Scotland with the rest of the world. In part 1 of Anchilethon, the poet feels isolated after climbing the peak Scar nan Gillian. On the neighboring peak, MacLean sees a ghostly band elegizing the eviction of people from the island of Rassay by the proprietor MacLeod during the mid 19th century. White details the impact of the knowledge of such forced emigration on MacLean. Some were cleared to improve the leasable value of land, particularly on the east coast between Ayr and Skirpaddle. Many of the writs of removal survive. The history of such eviction makes it difficult for MacLean to establish a harmonious relation with the landscape, and this sense of alienation intensifies further as the poem progresses. Placed against the memory of forced eviction, the listing of the names of cities that collectively experienced political turmoil, from the rise of the Nazis in Hamburg in the elections of 1932 to the British occupation of Calcutta in India, becomes an instance of seeking Scotland's assimilation with the rest of the world, while underlining the truncated progression of history towards a decisive Marxist revolution. MacLean writes, "The ghost band began a dance, and that was the auspicious exercise. The coronach of the people, leaving, mingled in the din of the gentlemen, appeared Vienna and Barcelona, Shanghai, Hamburg and Harbin, Calcutta, Borirag and London, Prague, Naples, and Munich." In populating the lines with place names, the setting of the Killin becomes less of a realistic locale suited for a meditation on the nature of revolution and turns out to be to be more of an imagined and supernatural territory. Its inaccessible nature complements a present that is haunted by the ghosts of men who have given their lives to the socialist cause. MacLean writes further, Lenin, Marx, MacLean, Thielman, Dimitrov, Macpherson, Mao Zedong, and his men, the devilish revelry would drown the voice of the wise and the cry of the tortured. And though in the face of distress I had the strength and courage of Stalin, the screeching noise would oppress me while the great Killin reeled dizzily. Revelry is by those who commemorate the despoliation of the landscape, and Maclean's selection of proper names in the following lines of the poem repeat the earlier attempt to interweave the microcosm with the macrocosm. However, the ghostly presence of those who make the music transports the poet to a timeless space, and this reproduces in the poem what Benjamin describes as activating the emergency brakes of history. Similar to MacDiarmid seeking a merger with the spirit of Dostoevsky, MacLean imagines himself to be like Stalin. Such an identification reveals MacDiarmid's strong conviction that only the triumph of a Bolshevik regime in Scotland can nullify the tragic aftermath of the forced emigration of the Gaelic peasantry. The sense of desolation that impinges upon the mind of the poet within the environment of the Killin makes nature into a force that threatens to subdue thought rather than motivate it. The poem seems to suggest that if a Marxist revolution is to come about, it can only take place through an awareness of how the mind is absorbed into matter and how nature itself becomes an imposition on the act of connecting personal memory with history. Thank you all very, very much.